let's get the ball rolling. Shell, could you give us a little bit about yourself and why you created Indie Author Magazine and authorautomations.com too?
Hi everybody. I'm Shel Honecker. I'm the publisher and co-founder of Indie Author Magazine. I have a background in technology and training. I was in the travel industry for many years, and I ran a couple of travel magazines. And when I had gone to a couple of conferences, most specifically in Edinburgh, Scotland, and then in London to Self-Publishing Formula Live, I met an amazing group of people that actually became my best friends. And through a series of events and in the middle of the pandemic, we started to sprint every day on Zoom and started to share tips and tricks and things that we were doing and courses we were taking and websites we'd discovered. And we, from that, started a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet, when it got to be 500 lines long, we built a website. And then when we built the website, we thought, gosh, we really need more context and more conversation around some of this, more nuance and more research. And so that's how the magazine was born, was out of pandemic boredom and necessity, I guess is the best way to put it. So we're about to turn 4. We'll be 4 in May. And so, yeah, with that, we have a sister project. Actually, Indie Author Training came next. And that is where all the different instructors around our industry come and teach their classes there. And authorautomations.com was a passion project. I don't know why. I have enough to do, but it was sort of where I was talking about nerdy stuff like WordPress plugins and Zapier and make.com. And so I just started writing about it there, and it immediately took off. I'm shocked at how quickly it's actually taken off. Yeah, that's where I sort of write about all the nerdy stuff that I do. So,
And when we talk about automations, are we talking about automating like entire categories of things like marketing? Like, can you just automate all of that? Or is that like, are we automating like very specific tasks within, certain areas?
yeah, so the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is no, you shouldn't, right? Because marketing is a big, giant leap of things, and there's a lot of things that go into marketing. So you can automate literally anything. Like I automate when my grandchild gets within 15 feet of my door and her mom's phone clicks off, I have an automation that actually plays a welcome music, Baroque, The Princess Has Arrived song. Like you can automate anything. But the short answer is, should you? Should you automate everything? And so philosophically, what I say is figure out what the people stuff is and what the people should be doing, and then automate the rote kind of junky stuff. So for example, I automate all of our social media, right? And so our social media, I have an automation that reads every one of the articles. We have between 12 and 20 articles every month in Indie Author Magazine. It reads the articles and it creates the captions, and it creates specific captions for LinkedIn and for Twitter and for Facebook, and it knows our audience and it knows how it should tweak those. And so we've automated it to customize it to each one of the different channels, right? And it creates the imagery for each of the articles, and then it posts to our social media channels automatically. What we wanted to do was free our social media person up so that they can go have conversations with people. So what we're trying to do is keep the humanity in there and make sure that people work is done by people and automation work is done by bots. And so the short answer, again, the long answer is yes, you can automate anything, but philosophically think about if you should, and think about what things are best done by bots and what things are best done by people.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense because especially with something like social media, I think if you automate too much of it, you do take that humanity away. And if you're not engaging on social media with people,
Exactly.
or it feels like the engagement is really artificial, then yeah, it doesn't, it's not going to do anything for you, right? Because people just won't engage with you.
Adding to the noise.
Exactly. That, and like if it just seems very artificial too, you're not going to be, what you post is not going to go anywhere, because if people are not engaging with it, then the algorithm, now all the, timelines and everything, they're all algorithmically driven, right? So it's not just based off of date stamps anymore. It's based off of how many people are engaging with it. And so it just won't be shown to anyone's timelines. So.
Yeah, you're actually doing yourself, it's doing the opposite of what you want it to do, right? You think you're getting your name and information out there, but in fact, what you're training the bots to do is ignore you.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That makes a ton of sense. I think before we get into a lot of these deeper conversations around automations, I think a lot of this can feel very burdensome or maybe daunting starting out. So I'm curious for people that might feel technologically intimidated by this stuff. What's your advice on getting started with automations?
So, the first thing that I always have people do is start to make a list of the things that you're doing throughout the week because it's hard. I mean, it's kind of easy to say, oh, I'm going to automate that, but it might be something that you like. And so you really shouldn't automate it, right? And so I always tell people to do a list of the things that you're doing throughout the week and then put a little star next to the things that go on a suck it list. It's the things that you hate to do, you don't like to do, right? So some people don't like to post on social media. Some people don't like to write their newsletter. Some people don't like to, reply to newsletters or reply to emails. So those are all the things that you have to do as authors. Well, really, we're not really, if you think about what we are, we're publishers that happen to write. We're not writers that publish anymore because we have to run a business. So look at all of the administrative tasks that you have to do and decide which of those you don't like to do. And then start with one, start small, right? So start with an email response, start with a social post, start with your newsletter. You can automate your newsletter pretty simply. You can do it with a blog post and then it, busts out into all the different places. I like to look at things that you can combine into tasks, right? So taking the example of a newsletter, if you post on your website a blog, you can actually automate most of the newsletter services to send that newsletter out on your behalf just from posting on a blog. So you're doing the same amount of work, but it's being syndicated to multiple places. So you're doing actually less work. Or.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. I would say one thing that I would recommend to authors that are automating their newsletters from their blog posts as well is there's still a little bit of refinement I would recommend when you're setting up that automation. Can you customize it so that you can tweak things a bit before it just gets sent out to everyone and stuff?
Yeah, I usually, for at least the first, 5 or 6 of them, set them to draft mode before you actually send them out. That way you can go in and make sure that it looks the way that you want it to look. But you can start very, very simply. You can start with a blog post that, creates it and then sends it out to folks. And again, most newsletters have that capability built in. So it'll pick up if you write a blog post and send it out automatically. You can automate that. You can go even deeper than that and you can automate what's called a custom RSS feed, right? So this is getting a little bit more technical, a little bit nerdier. So just think of this as high level. What you can do is you could have it watch hashtags on Instagram for good news. You can watch feeds on Twitter for hashtags that pertain to your like romantasy, for example. And you can use something like Zapier to bring all of those together. And you can have one newsletter with different sources of information, again, automated. It just brings it in and you don't really have to do anything except approve it and send it out. So again, you can automate anything. I can automate the snot out of anything, but how much time are you going to spend setting that up versus the reward for how much time is it going to save you? So you have to really look at the cost benefit to everything that you do.
Right. Absolutely. If it's going to take me 3 hours to build some automation, but it's only going to save me 30 seconds of time every week, that's not really worth it because it'd take years for that automation to pay off. And likely by the time that it would get to that payoff, I might have actually, I wanted to change the process, but now I'm sort of stuck in that process doing it that way a little bit because I've built that automation and now I'm like, okay, I have to break this and figure out.
And technology changes too, right?
Right.
So anything that you start with in terms of an automation, you want to be sure that you can keep up with it and you can be sure that it's not actually going to cost you money in the long run. I use Zapier for almost everything. And I actually went back and looked at what I was spending on Zapier. And I went back and looked and I had some automations that I built 2 or 3 years ago that were great, but weren't really doing anything that I needed anymore. So be sure that you go back and review them periodically. I have an automation that actually is, I had forgotten that I had done and saved my bacon totally. We had a chance to move all of our emails from one system to another system. And in the process of that, it got corrupted, and we had paid developers to do that. But I had set up an automation years ago that anytime someone subscribed to our newsletter, it duplicated their email and their IP address and the date they signed up on a Google Sheet. So I had a running backup of everything that was happening in real time on a Google Sheet. And we were able to take that Google Sheet and import that instead of, trying to fix a corrupted file forever. So it's
Oh.
little things like that, those, they might not be time savings, but they do save you in the long run from losing data, and you can set them up and then sort of forget about them until you need them.
And someone asked, can they ask questions? I just want to clarify. Anyone is welcome to drop questions in the chat at any point as well, and I will work them into the conversation as we're going. So anyone that has any questions for Shell, feel free to drop them in the chat if you need clarification or anything like that. To get back to what you were saying though about you do a lot of this with Zapier, do you treat Zapier as sort of your central hub for managing all of your processes that you're doing, or do you have some other note system where you track a lot of this stuff and have that all sorted out?
So Notion is my sort of one ring to rule them all. It's my task manager, and I have automations starting with my email, and it connects to Notion. So I'll give you kind of an example of my day. I start the morning by doing triage in my email, and anything that I go through, it either gets deleted, it gets responded to if it takes me less than 2 minutes, or I send it to Notion as a task. And Notion is my task manager for everything. But I have an automation that takes things from one place and puts them into Notion. I also try not to keep a ton of tabs open throughout the day. So I have a Notion web clipper that will save web pages that I want to reply to or look at later. And I put them in Notion as notes. So it's called a personal knowledge management, or PKM, if people kind of want to geek out on that. And so that way I always have them as reference, and I don't have a ton of tabs open because my brain is neurospicy. And so if I have too much open, I will do nothing. So I try and keep everything into a system as much as possible. So Notion is my one ring to rule them all. It's where I keep all of that. I also use Notion Calendar because then I can time block different things. I use a concept of maker versus manager time. So my maker time is in the morning. That's when I do all my writing. That's when my brain is fresh. And then I do admin stuff in the afternoon during my manager block. And that's when I answer emails and do all my stupid SEO stuff and write blurb, dumb stuff. All the dumb stuff we have to do in the afternoon.
I am curious for those who are on. Does anyone else here use any sort of personal knowledge management system like Notion or anything else? I'm curious for those of you on. Drop it in the chat if you use something like that, Notion or Asana, or there are a lot of different tools out there. Or if it's just you're currently using just your notes app on your phone to manage your day-to-day tasks or anything like that. I think we'll get a lot of recommendations in there too, so people who are exploring other things might look at some of those things in the chat. This question is, someone else had a question for you, Shell, which is, how did you decide which parts of publishing to use automation for and which ones you didn't?
So I've been using automation for a really long time. So that's kind of a hard question for me to answer because I come from the perspective of automate everything, literally as much as I can. When I'm talking with other people, it's mostly centered around things that they can do but don't want to do or shouldn't do. So for example, that they might be thinking about really need to hire a VA or a PA, an assistant to do this part, right? I might need somebody to manage my beta readers better, or I might need someone to manage my social media better. And that's kind of the place where I say, all right, well, think about maybe you could automate this, right? Maybe you can automate your social media. Maybe you can automate your beta readers. Maybe you can automate your tasks and your launch sequences and those kinds of things. That's kind of the point that I say start with is, can you automate it so that it's more consistent? Can you automate it so that it's more efficient, so that it's faster, so that you don't miss steps? Sometimes automation isn't about faster, but it's about consistency.
Yeah, that makes sense. And getting a little bit into the technical side of things, like how with these automations, for example, turning your blog posts into a newsletter. Let's start with like a very discrete task like that. How would you go about trying to automate that?
So most, depending on what email system you use, most of them have tutorials on that. I also have tutorials on authorautomations.com. That's my free Substack, right? So again, that's my sort of my passion project. And if you become a paid member, I give you like the recipes for make.com and Zapier, but the information is 100% free. So if you go to authorautomations.com, I do have one particular article where I walk you through setting that up, right? It becomes an RSS feed. Here's how you do it for MailerLite. Here's how you do it for MailPoet. Here's how you do it for SendFox. Here's how you do it for MailChimp, right? So there's all these different sort of ways you can figure that out. I do have a ton of content over there, not to sort of hijack and get everybody to over there, but that's
No,
really
that's
where I
great.
write about it and where people can ask me questions and I answer them. I like figure out puzzles. That's the way my brain works. So if someone asks me a question, I had somebody that asked me the other day, they're like, hey, wonder if we could use Midjourney to do this. I'm like, oh, well, let's just spend 45 minutes and figure that out together. I just have to go off and it's my bright, shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense because that is um one thing we're not going to be able to do is like within the next hour be able to say here's how to automate exactly every single task that you can get to, because building each automation is probably going to take 20 or 30 minutes of time. So having those resources available to authors on those very discrete things is super helpful. So yeah, after this chat we'll talk about, I think it's good, let's get like a good high level overview of how we go about doing these things, and then when authors want to explore each one of those individual tasks more in depth, authorautomations.com is a great place to check out. Michelle, I've gone through it and you've got a lot of good articles on how to do very specific things.
Pop one into the chat here.
Yeah.
So Lynn had a question about which program reads your blog and posts to social media. Lynn, that article that I just popped in there, that's part 4 of a series, but that'll actually kind of help you answer that. And you can use Zapier, but a lot of social media companies have ways for it to read it automatically. So that's a good place to get started.
And when it comes to automating things like posting to your social media, are you using something like Hootsuite or Buffer, or what are your favorite tools for automating social media?
So I use a combination of a couple of things. The main one that I use, there's Promo Republic that I like, and then there's also one called VistaSocial.com. VistaSocial.com is the one that I use most of the time, and the reason why is because it has scheduling via a queue, so I can batch create 25 or 30 posts to Facebook and 25 to 30 posts for Twitter and Blue Sky and all the others. And then I can say, all right, now Vista Social, you decide when to put those up, right? I don't have to say put that up Thursday at 2:00 or Friday at 5:00. I can say, put it in the queue, and then Vista Social knows when my audience is most likely to be on and read it. So it queues it up for me automatically.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, because figuring out when people are actually going to see it is, if you post something at midnight, probably not too many people are going to see it.
Probably not. I am also a big fan of free. I like free things.
Yeah.
Vista Social has a free one to get started with.
And that's so valuable, especially when you're just starting out, to see whether or not doing any of this stuff really works for you and your process as well, because you don't want to go and spend $1,000 on, building all these automations and things just to figure out that, what, I don't actually like doing things this way, and I like the personal touch, or I like doing this stuff myself and things, and being very hands-on with it. So Vista Social sounds like a good one, especially for getting started.
It's a good one. And to that point, Evan, we're all creatives, right? That's why we write, is because we're creative. So if you like to do imagery, if you like to jump on Canva and create all of your images, don't automate that if you like doing it. Only automate it if you don't like doing it. I don't like images. I'm graphically challenged. I'm not allowed to create. I'm literally not allowed to create images in the magazine. If there is a moratorium, Shell cannot touch imagery. So, fine, I'll automate it and then you'll like it.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I totally understand that. I think that is one of the troubles also with like a lot of these website builders, right? Is like if you give me a sandbox and there's no rules and I can just do whatever I want, then I will make it look bad, right? I that's part of one of the reasons why I built like the social that's why I built the Story Origin website builder feature. Is it's just it's very constrained. It's like you tell it the books you want on the landing page, and then Story Origin will just lay it out for you in that order and figures out all the padding and all the colors and all of that stuff. Does 99% of it for you. Because yeah, otherwise you let me play with the padding and the margins and the centered or left aligned and all that stuff, and I will make it look messy for sure.
Again, it's the thing you can do versus the thing you should do.
Exactly. And so it's so much better to have that time be spent writing or something instead.
Right.
At a high level overview, so we've talked about social media and we've talked about newsletters as well. When it comes to social media, is there how can we already have all this content from our books, right? Many authors, a lot of fiction authors generally don't have blog posts that they can repurpose for social media content, but they are creating a lot of content for their books. What are ways that authors can repurpose some of that content to post to social media instead of spending hours coming up with new ideas and things to post?
So I will say, if you are comfortable using assistive AI, not generative AI, that's different, right? But assistive AI, if you're comfortable with assistive AI, you can create I'll just take Chat GPT, for example. You can create a Chat GPT assistant. You can upload your own works and it doesn't share it with the larger language models, right? So that it's still within just your ecosystem and it's not training another AI. And you can create a way for you to engage and ask it for things. So for example, I have a custom GPT and I've uploaded PDFs of my books, and I can say, I want you to create 15 Facebook posts based on chapter 15. And it will do that, right? And it can create imagery if you want, although I'm not a big fan of using AI for imagery. I like stock photography, or I like to use artists for imagery, right? That's generative. I don't tend to use generative AI. I tend to use assistive AI, which means that I'm using it to assist me in tasks and things. And then I can ask it to create an entire marketing calendar for me. I can ask it, you can ask it to find plot holes in different things too, but that's not social media, which is what we're talking about right now. But you can ask it to actually create an entire social media calendar based on your own work. There's another automation that I've created completely separately that I do sort of talk about on authorautomations.com, but it's a make.com scenario, and it will start with a Google Doc. So if you've got a Google Doc of your chapter, or a Google Doc of your blurb, or a Google Doc of your synopsis, or a Google Doc of literally anything, it'll start with that Google Doc, and it will create social media posts and captions and quotes and imagery and all kinds of things. And it uses imagery that's stock photography and not generative photography, although it will do generative if you want. If you wanted to use Midjourney or, any of the other like generative imagery AI, you can. But I happen to use Pixabay and Upsplash and different stock photography to create custom images, quote images for those. You can use assistive AI for that.
And what was the name of the service that you use for doing that again?
So it's a make.com scenario. And on authorautomations.com, I have a blog post that talks about it.
Awesome. Sweet.
Yeah. I feel like I'm pitching it a lot, but really where my brain goes to like write all this stuff down.
No, that's what you're telling us how you do it, which is great. That's what we want. You did mention in there that you also will sometimes use it for finding plot holes, or you can use it for finding plot holes and things as well. Yeah. I'm curious, so we've talked about social media and we've talked about newsletters a little bit as well. Where can you use automations within, sort of the publishing side as well of things?
So I use what are called custom GPTs. They're my own GPTs. And I do that because I don't want to like chat with it in an open, even though I've shut it off, it can handle more knowledge. There's a place where you can upload your own files. So I will often upload things there and let it work as my developmental editor and say, all right, does this have enough tension? Does this hit the tropes in the right spots? Does it do those things? So I can engage with it as a developmental editor, right? I can also, of course, you can have it proofread anything, and you can say, make sure that I don't have any spelling errors. You can load in your knowledge the names of all of your characters so that it will find if you've spelled one wrong or you've got it, kind of mixed up with something. I did one time I changed the name of my protagonist midway through. So before it was, one name, and then the last half of it was a different name, and it caught it, thank goodness, because it was, you get blind to it as you're writing. I know we all suffer from this, where you've read it like 500 times and you need another pair of eyes on it. And maybe you don't have the budget to have a full developmental edit or a full line edit or copy edit. So this is a pretty good stopgap to get you to the next phase. I also will have it look for, like I said, plot holes, or I'll have it look for places where I can add an Easter egg or some foreshadowing to book 2. If I'm working on a series, I can have it generate entire series Bibles. So I will say, give me a list of all of the characters and where they appear so that I can make sure that there's continuity and I'm not really kind of, going off on bright, shiny object rabbit trails.
Yeah. So when you say that you are creating a custom GPT, tell us how that works. Like what do you do to do that?
So if you have the paid version of ChatGPT, in the upper right-hand corner where you see your picture, if you click on that, there is a button there that says My GPTs. And you can click on that and you can create what's called a custom GPT. And within that custom GPT, you can upload knowledge, right? It's the only knowledge that that particular custom GPT will use for anything. So you can upload your book, you can upload your own style guide, you can upload your tone of voice, you can upload your objectives, your marketing objectives, you can upload anything that would be helpful, right? So you're taking all this swath of knowledge from your entire ecosystem and your business, and you're uploading it into one place. And then you can use that as your business consultant, your developmental editor, your social media manager. All of it can be in that one place. Now, I have several custom GPTs. I have one that helps me write Author Automation's newsletter. I have one that helps me do the social media marketing for the magazine. I have one that helps me do email sequencing and everything for indieauthortraining.com. I have different ones because I speak in a different voice for different businesses and different aspects of it. So it's basically my assistant, and it does all the things that I need it to do. That's on the paid version. There's also a task manager within custom GPTs now. You can actually set it up to remind you of tasks. So I can say, remind me to, take my vitamins every morning at 7 a.m. and it'll do that. I mean, I think that's not the most efficient use, but it's sort of highlighting what's coming, what's possible now and what's coming, because eventually what's coming are agents that you can say, I want to write my newsletter, and you've connected it with enough things so that it'll know you're going to write a WordPress blog post. It's going to be in this tone of voice. It's going to pull from these sources. It's going to draft it. It's going to email it to you to say yes. And then you can reply to that email and it will send it automatically. And you don't even have to log into WordPress to do anything. And then it'll post it to your social media. So those kinds of agents are coming.
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly seems like those will be not too far off. And I'm curious, when you are having work as like a developmental editor, you were saying you have some of these questions figured out, like, are there any plot holes? Trying to figure out how do I increase the tension here or things like that. Do you have like a list of questions that you just give it every time you upload a new book that you want to have it, run through, where you're saying answer these sets of questions for each chapter of this book or something?
So you can, right? But the greatest use of a GPT like that is just to say, I don't know where to start. So you can say, act as a developmental editor. It knows what the skill set is of a developmental editor. Now, it might not know every nuance, but it knows. You can also start with a higher level thing and say, this is my audience, right? So let's say I write urban fantasy. I can say, I write urban fantasy. My audience is 18 to 24-year-old females. They like a little bit of romantasy. They like, shared worlds. They like whatever it is, right? You can put all of that into a chat window, and you can say, based on these parameters, how compelling is this story? Where do you see places where I can improve? So you can use it for technical, right? Is the pacing right? Is this, but that's again, a little bit subjective. So you're going to have to ask it questions against some metric, right? So you can say, I'm using a 3-act structure. Does this fit the framework of a 3-act structure? Or I'm using, romancing the beats. Does this fit that structure? And it does know those structures, right? Because those are in the large language models. You can also upload a PDF of whatever that structure is if you'd like, and say, this is, what it is. You can also upload versions of your previous works or your voice, and you can say, I write this. My tone is snarky, right? My tone is really sort of sassy and snarky. So I can actually say to my GPT, up the snark, and it knows what I mean by that, staying within a professional parameter. It's not going to tell you a dirty joke or, a knock knock joke or something. It's going to stay, but it knows. And then what I do, Evan, is I refine it, right? So I do add to the knowledge, and it does add to the knowledge as it goes along too. So you might not start out with 10 things or 10 questions that you want it to ask it every time, but you can say, remember this for next time, and it'll add to the knowledge so that you can have a running thread. It just learns as you go.
That all seems super helpful. And I'm curious, with another part of the sort of publishing realm of things, are there other parts of the publishing process, for example, like audiobooks or things where you might involve automation to some degree?
Yeah. So I have an automation because I narrate quite a bit. I know it's shocking that I'm really quiet and I never talk, but yes, I narrate most of my stuff. So I dictate. So I'll go on long rambling walks, and I will use Otter.ai to record, right? And then I don't use Otter for the transcriptions. What I do is when I come back, I will use Otter's export feature, and I will export it into a Dropbox. And I have a Zapier Zap that will monitor that folder in Dropbox, and then it will send it to ChatGPT's Whisper, and it will transcribe it, and then it can add things to it. It'll do all the punctuation, it'll clean it all up, and then it will actually email it to my editor when it's done. I don't have to do anything else except upload that one folder, and it will send it to my editor and say, this is transcribed. Can you check it? Make sure it's good. And then it'll put it back into wherever it needs to go from there. And it'll also add it as a Notion task so that I know that I've assigned it to Nicole to edit, and I can monitor that. So that's just one, complete automation that does that. You can also obviously use it for audiobook narration. 11 Labs is surprisingly good, shockingly good. We're no longer in the realm of canned things that have weird enunciation, weird cadence, weird sentence structure. You can record your own voice. I have a friend, Bradley Charbonneau, who does his own narration, and he has a company called Repurposing.com. And he sent me a note the other day, and I sent it back and replied. He goes, did you even know that was AI? And I said, I absolutely would never have guessed that that was AI. It was a 45-minute blog post that he'd written, that he'd narrated, and that he ran through 11 Labs. He's trained his voice in 11 Labs, and it's perfect. You can also do dual POV, right? 11 Labs has the ability to do dual POV now, which is phenomenal. It's generative AI, so some folks do not like that, but it is, a very cost-effective way for indies to do their own thing. A lot of people will say, well, I can't afford narration anyway. So it never would have existed if I hadn't done it with 11.
Right. Yeah, that is one way of thinking about things is, if the cost is so high, it would have never existed. It's bringing the cost down where it makes it more accessible to people.
Yeah.
There's a question though of like, I know that there were some changing things around this a few years ago, and I don't know if things have changed since then, but are audiobook marketplaces accepting AI narrated audiobooks now, or
So
what
some,
things look like on that front?
yeah, so some, and it's changing. So I know right now Katie Cross is working with Spotify. She narrates her own books, but they're looking at cloning her voice. There's also a company called Spoken.com, and what they do is they work with audiobook narrators. And so the audiobook narrators have licensed their voice to that. And so anything that's done that way is, but every marketplace and every vendor is going to be just a little bit different. But I would also say that's changing really fast. So what's true today might not be true next week.
Right, because the narration is really just, it has gotten so much better so quickly.
It has. And a lot of this is self-disclosed too, right? So if you record an MP3 or an MP4 and you upload it, they're still requiring you, it's incumbent on you to tick the box that says it's AI generated.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Are there other parts of the publishing process that you are, so we covered, sort of the developmental editing portion, audiobooks. Are there other parts of the publishing process where you're involving automations, like in terms of outlining or brainstorming or any of that kind of stuff?
So I
Sorry about that. Had to mute some.
So I had a conversation this morning, in fact, with Pseudowrite. And for those that don't know, Pseudowrite is a writing tool, and they're coming out with this really cool thing where they're calling it, I think they're calling it ideation or musings or something. I don't know exactly what it's called yet, but they have it just that plotting. So you just sort of free association, free thought. You just sort of ramble into your phone, into a phone note, and it will take that and it will thread it into a plot for you. It's really, really going to be quite cool when it's finished. I do use it for ideation, for brainstorming. Mostly I use Pseudowrite and other sort of GPTs just to validate my own ideas and to be sure that I've kind of thought it through and I'm not, making vampires into turtles or something. I mean, we're creative, so we get weird. We get super weird about stuff. And if your goal is commercial sales fiction, you kind of have to adhere to tropes and things. So mostly I just use it for validation. But there's lots and lots, plotter.com has, plotting kind of in the mix there too. So there's lots of ways that you can automate some of those things. Mostly it's getting it into a format where one thing can talk to another thing, which is really where that bridge, that Zapier, that make.com, Pabbly, those are all kind of great levelers, I guess is the right word, or the way I'm thinking of it. It's a way for two systems to talk to each other that normally wouldn't talk to each other. That's the essence of automation in itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, just having all that stuff, because a lot of that stuff is challenging to get connected, and that's a lot of what authors don't want to be doing is, okay, now I have to copy this thing from here over and then paste it over here, or I need to reformat this thing into this other way, or I did my outline just as like, a bunch of paragraphs of stuff, and I'd much rather it be in a bunch of bullet points or like a list form. And so just being able to say, here's my outline that I came up with that's just paragraphs, turn this into bullet points or something of the sort, can be extremely helpful. If we're coming to the close here, so if anyone has any other questions, please drop them in the chat. But I do still have one question myself, which is, if you could choose to only keep one of your automations, which would it be? This would be a good place for other authors to get started too, I think.
It would be my social media post creation. I think that's that's the one that I used to spend so much time on, and it was so stressful, and I literally do 15 minutes of work a month now for social media creation and posting. I just don't worry about it. And then I have our social media manager that, has conversations. So that's been the best. Tammy asked if I've used Convergence. No, I've not used Convergence. I tend to build my own. I haven't played with that one yet. So that's an interesting one. There are so many of them that are popping up.
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of new developments in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And someone asked, is there stuff that works with WordPress websites? And I think you have a lot of stuff about how to automate stuff with your WordPress website on your authorautomations.com.
I do. So really what there isn't like one app for it, right? It really does sort of depend on what you're doing and how you're doing it. So the one that works best with WordPress, it depends on what email service provider you're using. It depends, like there's a lot of variables in there. So I would say if you go on authorautomations.com, there's a bunch of posts there where I talk about the different ones. And again, it's free. But if you have a specific use case, you can always just send me a note and I can sort of point you in the right direction. Does the $7 a month version give us access to everything? Yes, it does.
So just to clarify, that's the pricing on getting access to all of the info on authorautomations.com. Do you have multiple tier levels, and what are they?
Yeah, it's $7 a month for the basics. And then I've got a page where you can download all of the different recipes for make.com and zapier.com. And then I do host office hours once a week on Thursday mornings at 10 a.m. where you can come and just ask me a bunch of questions. I just sort of open up a Zoom and whoever shows up, shows up. So that's part of the paid $7 a month tier. I just wanted it to be accessible, but also, have to keep the lights on. So want to be sure that I'm responsible with my time and money there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Awesome.
Ali asked if you automate social media graphics, can you plug in or specify specifics? Yes, you can. So what I have 12 different templates that I use. So I have one for quotes. I have one we have an advice column in the magazine called Dearing Deannie. She has her own template. And so you can say, depending on what category or how you're doing it, you can send it to a different template. So you set all of your own colors and creations up in advance.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today, Shell, about all this stuff. And I think what the broad takeaways here would be are figure out what you don't like to do today that you're doing, or what are you simply not doing today because you don't want to do it, like doing social media because you don't want to invest a ton of time into it, and figuring out ways, could I do this in 15 minutes per month instead of having to spend hours every week doing it? And then from there, it's going to be about figuring out how to get those systems to work out, because it's all going to be dependent upon what you're currently working with. Like, do you use Notion, or do you use MailerLite, or do you use WordPress, or so getting all those things together, it's going to be a variable number of things. And so then going to just Google and saying, how can I automate this specific thing, and finding out a workflow from there, or going to authorautomations.com and seeing if you already have a blog post or a recipe for automating some of those connections between the various things. So thank you again so much, Shell, for coming and chatting with us today.
My pleasure. Also just want to mention, if you want some hands-on help, I'm also teaching this at Author Nation in November. So you can come and hang out with me in Vegas and learn about a ton of this.
Fantastic. Awesome. I will see you there. I always love going to Author Nations, and you coordinate all of the programming for that. Yeah.
I'm the programming director. So I get to nerd out at the highest level with all the other super nerds that get to talk about all this stuff. So yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to nerding out with you there in November again. So, awesome. All right. Thank you everyone for coming, and we will see you in the next one. Bye everyone.